"Don't move," the Virgin whispered, then kissed the Amish man to save his life. A rattlesnake strikes in the high Colorado wilderness, its venom burning through a man's veins. Alone and dying by the creek, an Amish homesteader gasps for breath when a traveling virgin midwife stumbles upon him. "Don't move," she whispers, her hands shaking as thunder splits the sky. Then, she does the unthinkable. She presses her lips to his wound to draw out the poison and saves his life. But by sunrise, the mountains aren't whispering gratitude. They're whispering scandal. The town says the Virgin broke her vow. The preacher says she must marry the man she kissed. And the railroad men want his land gone before spring. As faith, shame, and love collide in a cabin lit by one trembling lamp. Was it sin that saved him? Or mercy sent by God? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thunder crackled overhead as Margot Bell guided her tired mare along the creek bed. 3 days of hard riding between settlements had left both horse and rider bone-weary. The setting sun painted long shadows across the San Juan Valley, and the autumn air carried the sharp scent of coming rain. Her eyes caught movement by the water's edge, a crumpled form that shouldn't be there. Margot pulled her mare to a stop, squinting through the dimming light. A man lay sprawled beside the creek, one arm flung out, his broad-brimmed hat fallen beside him. "Dear Lord," she whispered, swinging down from her saddle. Her boots crunched on gravel as she approached. The man wore simple dark clothing, plain trousers, a collarless shirt, suspenders. Amish clothing. His beard was full but neatly trimmed, his features strong even in unconsciousness. Then she saw his hand, swollen purple, angry puncture marks visible on the flesh. A rattlesnake bite. Her stomach clenched. Kneeling beside him, Margot pressed trembling fingers to his neck. His pulse fluttered weak and rapid beneath her touch. "Can you hear me?" she asked, though she knew he was beyond responding. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face. He was handsome, she noticed, despite herself, with kind lines around his eyes, even in suffering. Another crack of thunder made her jump. "Lord, give me strength," she prayed. The venom had to be drawn out quickly, or this stranger would die. There was only one way, and the very thought of it made her cheeks burn with shame. To press her lips to a man's flesh, it went against everything she believed about maintaining her purity. But to let him die when she could help, that would be an even greater sin. "Don't move," she whispered, though he gave no sign of hearing. Her hands shook as she lifted his injured hand. "Please forgive me for this." Margot closed her eyes and pressed her lips to the wound. The taste was bitter and metallic as she sucked out the poison, spitting repeatedly into the mud. Thunder boomed overhead, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The man gasped suddenly, his body arching. His eyes flew open, clouded with fever and confusion. "Where bish do?" he mumbled in Pennsylvania Dutch, before falling back into unconsciousness. The storm broke in earnest now. Margot knew she had to get him to shelter. "Where do you live?" she asked, though he couldn't answer. Looking around desperately, she spotted a thin trail of smoke rising from behind a stand of cottonwoods. A cabin. It took all her strength to half-drag him to his feet. He was a big man, solid with muscle, and though he tried to help, his legs could barely hold him. The rain pounded down as they stumbled through the gathering dark. The cabin was small but solid, with a tin roof that rang with rainfall. Margot kicked the door open and hauled him inside, lowering him onto a narrow bunk. Her back screamed in protest. Working quickly by lamplight, she built up the dying fire in the stone hearth. The cabin was neat but sparse, some hanging herbs, a Bible on the table, basic furniture he must have made himself. A trapper's cabin, from the looks of the stretched hides on the walls. Through the long night, she tended him. She bathed his fevered brow with cool creek water, wrapped his swollen hand in healing poultices, and prayed over him continuously. When his fever sparked delirious mumbling, she sang hymns in a low voice, the familiar melodies seeming to calm him. "Be still and know that I am God," she whispered, watching his chest rise and fall. "Be still and know." The hours crept by. Eventually, his breathing steadied and his fever broke. In the gray pre-dawn light, Margot finally allowed herself to slump against the side of his bunk, utterly drained. "Please," she prayed, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, "let no one ever know what I had to do." The shame of it still burned, even though she knew she'd had no choice. To press her lips to a stranger's flesh, it went against everything she'd promised herself after. She pushed the memories away. This had been different. This had been to save a life, nothing more. Still, she prayed that when he woke, he wouldn't remember that part. Margot's head drooped as fatigue overtook her. The last thing she heard was the steady drum of rain on the tin roof and the soft breathing of the man whose life she had saved with a desperate kiss. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, casting golden squares across the rough-hewn floor. Levi Stoltzfus opened his eyes slowly, his mind foggy, and his body aching as if he'd been thrown from a horse. The familiar ceiling of his cabin swam into focus, but something was different. Someone was here. He turned his head carefully and saw a woman dozing in a chair beside his bunk, her head tilted against the wall. She wore a plain gray dress, its hem dusty from travel. A neat brown braid had come partially loose, wisps of hair framing her face. Levi tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. The movement startled the woman awake. She blinked at him with tired eyes that quickly filled with concern. "Please lie still," she said softly. "The venom isn't fully cleared from your body yet." Venom! The memory came back in fragments, the rattler striking as he checked his trapline, the burning pain, the desperate crawl toward the creek. After that, only fever dreams remained. His throat felt like sandpaper. "Who are you?" She rose and brought him a cup of water. "Margot Bell. I'm a traveling midwife. I found you by the creek last evening." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "You were very ill." Levi sipped the water gratefully. "I remember thunder and someone praying." "That was me." Margot busied herself checking his bandaged hand. "The Lord guided me to you just in time." "Thank you," he said simply. The Amish way was to show gratitude through actions rather than words, but he had nothing to offer except, "Wait, I have some tea left." He started to rise again, but Margot pressed him back with a gentle but firm hand. "You need to rest, Mr. Stoltzfus. Levi Stoltzfus." He settled back, too weak to argue. "But please let me give you something for your trouble." "God saved you, not I," she replied, shaking her head. "I was merely his instrument." A horse's hooves crunched on the gravel outside. Margot stepped quickly away from the bunk as a shadow passed the window. There was a knock. Then the door creaked open to reveal a young ranch hand, his hat already tipped in greeting. "Morning, Stoltzfus," the man said, eyes darting curiously between Levi and Margot. "Just checking you ain't dead. Saw your traps was empty yesterday." "Much obliged, Wes," Levi replied carefully. "Miss Bell here is a traveling midwife. She found me snake-bit." Wes Hanley's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That so? Well, ain't that fortunate?" He touched his hat brim again. "Ma'am, I'll let folks know you're on the mend, Stoltzfus." After he left, An uncomfortable silence filled the cabin. Margot moved to gather her belongings, her movements quick and nervous. "I should continue to Durango. There's a woman expecting her first child there." "Of course." Levy watched her pack her medical supplies into worn saddlebags. The afternoon light was fading already, and dark clouds were building again in the west. As Margot lifted her saddlebags, something clattered to the floor. Levi recognized the sound of a Bible falling. He leaned down despite the dizziness to help her retrieve it, and that's when he saw the inscription on its leather cover. "Margot Bell, Vow of Purity, 1871. Their eyes met for a moment before Margot quickly tucked the Bible away. She turned to leave, but Levi's sudden gasp stopped her. Heat was spreading through his body again, and the cabin seemed to tilt sideways. "The fever's returning," Margot said, professional concern overriding her discomfort. She pressed a cool hand to his forehead. "You're burning up." Thunder rumbled outside, closer this time. Margot glanced at the window, then back at her patient. "I'll stay until dawn," she said finally. "You shouldn't be alone if the fever worsens." She moved about the cabin, preparing more willow bark tea and fresh poultices. The storm drew nearer, rain beginning to drum against the roof. As evening settled in, a strange peace filled the small space, the kind that comes with shared silence and simple acts of care. Levi drifted in and out of awareness, but each time he opened his eyes, Margot was there. Sometimes praying, sometimes reading her Bible by lamplight. He wanted to ask about the inscription, about the story behind those words from 5 years ago, but he didn't. Some hurts were better left unspoken. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, healer and patient kept their respective vigils, each carrying private wounds, each offering what comfort they could in the quiet dark. The autumn sun hung high as Margot Bell guided her mare toward San Miguel 2 days later. She glanced back once at Levi's cabin, now just a speck against the mountains. His recovery had been steady. This morning he'd even managed to stand and walk a few steps, leaning on the wall for support. She'd left him with detailed instructions for cleaning the wound and enough dried willow bark for tea. The gentle clip-clop of hooves against the dusty trail soothed her nerves. She needed supplies, bandages, herbs, and some basic provisions before heading to her next patient. Her purse was light, but Mr. Jenkins at the general store had always extended her credit before. As she approached the settlement, something felt different. Women on porches turned away as she passed. Men stopped their conversations to stare. A group of children playing marbles scattered like startled quail. Margot dismounted outside the general store, smoothing her skirts and squaring her shoulders. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, but Mr. Jenkins barely looked up from his ledger. "I need some supplies," Margot said, placing her list on the counter. "If I could have credit until—" "No credit," Jenkins cut her off, still not meeting her eyes. "Cash only." "But you've always—" Margot's voice trailed off as Mrs. Preston, the preacher's wife, entered the store. Surely she would help explain. But Mrs. Preston took one look at Margot and turned on her heel, leaving without a word. Confused and hurt, Margot stepped back onto the street. Whispers followed her like autumn leaves skittering across the ground. She caught fragments. In the woods with that Amish man. Kissing him. And her with her vows, her chest tightened. How could they know about saving Levi? Who had seen? Then she remembered Wes Hanley's knowing smile, his quick departure on horseback. The truth twisted in his telling had outrun her to town. The church bell rang, and Margot saw Preacher Preston striding toward her, his face stern. A small crowd gathered, drawn by the promise of confrontation. "Miss Bell," he said loudly, "I believe you owe this community an explanation." Before Margot could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Levi Stoltzfus rode up on his draft horse, still pale but sitting straight in the saddle. He'd come to town for more medicine, unaware of the storm brewing around them. The preacher turned to him. "Mr. Stoltzfus, perhaps you can shed light on this situation. We've heard disturbing reports about you and our midwife." Levi dismounted slowly, his injured hand held careful against his chest. His eyes met Margot's across the crowd, seeing her distress. In that moment, something shifted in his expression. "There's nothing improper to explain, preacher," Levi said, his quiet voice carrying in the tense silence. "Miss Bell is my betrothed." The words fell like stones in still water. Margot's breath caught in her throat. The crowd murmured in surprise. "You're betrothed?" Preacher Preston's eyebrows rose. "Since when?" "We've been waiting for the right time to announce it," Levi continued steadily. "I apologize for any confusion this may have caused." The tension in the crowd eased. Women who had turned away now smiled tentatively. The preacher's frown softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "Well then," he said, "under the circumstances and given the rumors already circulating, I must insist you both live under proper church oversight until the marriage is sanctified. The old Miller cabin next to the church is empty. You'll stay there, Miss Bell, with my wife checking in daily. Mr. Stoltzfus can remain in his cabin but will attend services regularly." It wasn't a suggestion. Margot stood frozen, watching as 5 years of carefully built independence crumbled around her. The crowd dispersed, satisfied with this resolution. As the sun began to set, Margot found Levi behind the church, checking his horse's tack. "How dare you?" she hissed, anger and shame burning in her throat. "How dare you make such a claim without my consent?" Levi turned to face her, his expression troubled but resolute. "They would have driven you out," he said softly. "No community for 50 miles would trust a midwife with a ruined reputation. I couldn't let that happen, not when you risked everything to save my life." "So instead you've trapped us both in a lie?" Margot's voice shook. "I took a vow before God. You had no right." "I know about vows," Levi interrupted gently. "I broke mine when I left my community after Sarah died. Sometimes what we promise in pain isn't what God intends for our healing." Margot stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. The church bell tolled again, marking the end of day. Soon Mrs. Preston would come looking for her, to escort her to her new prison of propriety. "What happens now?" she whispered. "We trust that God has a plan," Levi answered. "Even if we can't see it yet." Morning frost crunched beneath Margot's boots as she packed her saddlebags outside the Miller cabin. Her hands trembled, not just from cold. 5 years of carefully guarded independence, gone in a single morning. The townsfolk had already accepted Levi's claim without question, treating her with renewed warmth that felt like salt in an open wound. Mrs. Preston supervised her packing, chattering about wedding preparations. "You'll need a proper dress, of course, and we must plan the social after services." "That won't be necessary," Margot interrupted, securing the last bag. "We'll be at Levi's cabin until things are settled." The lie stuck in her throat like honey gone bitter. Levi waited on his horse at the edge of town, straight-backed despite his healing hand. His dark beard and broad-brimmed hat cast shadows across his face, making his expression unreadable. Without a word, he nudged his horse forward as Margot mounted her mare. They rode north toward the mountains, the cold wind whipping their coats. Margot kept 3 lengths behind him, watching his shoulders shift with each step of his horse. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, neither willing to break it first. The sun climbed higher as they followed the winding trail. Aspens shivered their remaining golden leaves. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off the canyon walls. After what felt like hours, Levi finally spoke. "There's good grazing for your mare," he said without turning. "And the cabin's warm enough, once the fire's built up proper." Margot didn't respond. Her thoughts churned like leaves in a whirlwind. What would her patients think? How could she continue her work? And most pressing, how could she live under the same roof as a man without compromising everything she believed? Near dusk, they crested a ridge, and Levi's cabin came into view. It was larger than she remembered from her hurried days nursing him. 2 rooms of solid pine logs, a stone chimney, and a small barn for the horses. A creek gurgled nearby, half frozen at its edges. Levi dismounted stiffly, his injured hand still tender. "I'll tend to the horses," he said. "You can get settled inside." The cabin door creaked as Margot entered. Everything was neat but sparse. A plank table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against the far wall, and a hearth with hanging pots. The air smelled of pine smoke and dried herbs. She heard Levi's boots on the porch, then the sound of him dragging something heavy. He appeared in the doorway with a spare cot. "I'll set this near the hearth for you," he said, positioning it carefully. From a trunk, he pulled a length of thick wool blanket and some rope. With methodical movements, he strung the rope across the room, hanging the blanket to create a private space around the cot. Margot watched him work, her anger softening despite herself. He was trying to protect her modesty, even here. As darkness fell, Levi built up the fire. Margot sat on her cot, watching. The flames danced through gaps in the blanket. The first snowflakes began drifting past the window, tiny white stars against the gathering night. She heard him kneel by his bed, his voice a low murmur of prayer. "Lord, thank you for your mercy, for sending help when I was lost, for giving me another chance at life through your servant's hands." Margot's chest tightened. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering that desperate moment by the creek, the snake's venom on her tongue, the thunder rolling overhead like God's judgment. "I need to thank you again," Levi said softly from beyond the blanket. "What you did, it was brave and kind." "It was wrong," Margot whispered, her voice catching. "I broke my vow. My lips were consecrated to God's service alone, and I used them to—" "Mercy isn't a sin," Levi interrupted gently. "The Good Samaritan didn't stop to worry about propriety before helping a dying man." Margot stared at her hands folded in her lap, unable to meet his gaze through the blanket's divide. "You don't understand. After what happened during the war, what that soldier tried to do, I promised God I'd never let a man touch me, that my body would be his vessel alone. And now—" The fire crackled in the silence. Outside, the snow fell harder, hissing against the cabin's roof. "Sometimes," Levi said carefully, "what we promise in our darkest moments isn't what God truly asks of us. Sometimes he sends us down unexpected paths to teach us about grace." Margot pulled her shawl tighter, watching the shadows dance on the wool curtain between them. She couldn't respond. The weight of the day, the shame, the confusion, it all pressed down like the gathering snow, marking the turning of the season and the changing of everything she thought she knew. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the cabin, each sunrise bringing new tasks to fill the quiet hours. Margot rose early, gathering herbs from the sheltered spots beneath towering pines where winter hadn't yet claimed the land. Her fingers, chilled but sure, plucked yarrow and sage, oregano and mint, familiar friends that reminded her of her calling. Levi's hand needed daily tending. Each morning she unwrapped the bandages with careful movements, checking for signs of infection. The swelling had gone down, leaving mottled purple marks that were slowly fading to yellow. He never flinched when she applied fresh poultices, though she knew it must hurt. "You've got healing hands," he said one morning as she worked. The words hung in the air between them, simple but weighted with meaning. During the afternoons, Margot helped him mend his traps. The work required concentration, checking metal joints, replacing worn springs, ensuring each mechanism worked smoothly. It gave them something to focus on besides their unusual situation. Sometimes their fingers brushed as they passed tools back and forth, sending unexpected warmth through her hands. As darkness fell each evening, they settled into their spaces on either side of the wool curtain. Levi would light the lamp and open his well-worn Bible, his deep voice filling the cabin with familiar verses. Margot often found herself humming along when he read from Psalms, the old hymn tunes rising unbidden to her lips. They shared simple meals by lamplight, beans and cornbread, dried venison, the last apples from town. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, 2 lonely souls brought together by circumstance and scandal. Sometimes their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them before they looked away. One crisp morning, Margot returned from gathering kindling to find Levi seated by the window, a piece of charcoal moving across a scrap of paper. His broad shoulders were hunched in concentration, his injured hand cradling the page while the other sketched swift, sure strokes. She moved quietly, not wanting to disturb him, but caught a glimpse of the drawing, mountains rising bold against the sky, every ridge and shadow captured with surprising tenderness. In the corner, a single word was written in careful script: Anna. Levi noticed her looking and didn't hide the page. Instead, he touched the name gently with one blackened finger. "My wife," he said softly. She loved these mountains, even though she never saw them. I used to describe them in my letters, try to capture their majesty for her. She always said she'd come west with me someday. Margot set down her kindling. "What happened?" "She died bringing our son into the world." His voice was rough with old grief. "Neither of them survived the night. I couldn't stay after that. Left the community, left everything I knew, thought maybe I could find some peace in these wild places she dreamed of seeing." Margot's heart ached with recognition. "Pennsylvania," she said. "I left there too, after the war." Her hands twisted in her apron. "I was a nurse in a field hospital. One night, a soldier, he tried to—" She swallowed hard. "I fought him off, but something broke in me that night. I couldn't stay there with those memories. That's when I made my vow." Levi was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "We're both runners then, both carrying wounds that won't quite heal." "Yes," Margot whispered. "Though sometimes I wonder if God led us away from there so we could find something else. Something we needed." That evening, as they knelt for prayers on either side of the wool curtain, Levi's voice was especially gentle. "Lord, grant your peace to those who suffer. Heal the brokenhearted. Guide us through dark valleys into your light." Behind her curtain, Margot felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them, letting them fall freely in the lamplight. For the first time since that terrible night in the hospital, she felt truly seen, not as the virgin midwife or the scandal of San Miguel, but as herself. A woman who had survived, who had run, who had found perhaps not peace but understanding in this strange sanctuary. Through the curtain, she could see Levi's shadow, head bowed in prayer. Their shared pain had built a bridge between them, one constructed of quiet confessions and mutual comprehension. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something equally precious, the beginning of trust. A week passed, bringing with it the first real bite of winter. The morning air held frost, and steam rose from the creek where deer came to drink. Margot had just finished hanging herbs to dry when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A well-dressed stranger approached on a gleaming bay horse, his clothing marking him as someone from back east. His boots were barely dusty, and his coat looked freshly pressed. Levi emerged from the cabin, drying his hands on a cloth. "Good morning," the stranger called, dismounting with practiced grace. "Name's Gideon Wells, representing the Rio Grande and Western Railroad Company." He removed his hat, revealing neatly combed hair. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." Levi stepped forward, offering a cautious handshake. "Levi Stoltzfus, this here's Miss Bell." Wells nodded politely to Margot before turning back to Levi. "Fine piece of land you've got, Mr. Stoltzfus. I've been surveying the San Juan Valley for a new rail spur. Progress is coming to these parts, and it's coming fast." Margot watched Wells pull a folded map from his satchel, spreading it across a wooden stump. Red lines marked proposed routes through the valley. "You see, your property sits right where we need to lay track." Wells traced a line with his finger. "The company's authorized me to offer compensation for any landowners affected. We could have papers drawn up today. Enough money to start fresh somewhere else come spring." Levi studied the map, his face unreadable. "Much obliged for the offer, Mr. Wells, but I aim to stay. This land's not for sale." Wells's smile tightened slightly. "Now, Mr. Stoltzfus, I understand your attachment, but progress waits for no man. The railroad's coming whether we like it or not. Better to profit from it than stand in its way." "My answer's still no," Levi said quietly but firmly. After Wells rode away, Margot noticed how troubled Levi looked. She went inside and found the property deed in his trunk, yellowed but carefully preserved. As she examined it, something caught her eye. "Levi," she called, "this deed, it's in Anna's name." He nodded slowly. "Never could bring myself to change it after she passed. Felt wrong somehow, like I'd be erasing her memory." Margot's mind was working quickly. "Under territorial law, they can't seize property that belongs to a living wife without her consent. Even the railroad has to follow that rule." Levi looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath. "If we were to marry, for real, not just the pretense we've been living, the land would legally become mine. They couldn't touch it without my signature." The cabin grew very quiet. Through the window, they could see the last rays of sun painting the mountains gold. Levi stoked the fire, watching the flames leap higher. "It would mean breaking my vow," Margot said softly, "and you'd have to trust me with Anna's legacy. I know that's asking a lot." Levi remained silent, staring into the fire. The flames cast shadows across his face as he wrestled with the choice before him. Finally, he spoke. "Marriage shouldn't be just about protecting property. It's sacred in God's eyes." "I know," Margot replied, "but perhaps God sometimes works in ways we don't expect. Maybe he brought us together for more than just healing from our pasts." The fire crackled between them as evening settled over the cabin. Outside, an owl called into the gathering darkness. Inside, two wounded souls considered a choice that would bind them together, not just in name, but in law and faith. Levi turned from the fire to look at her directly. "You'd be giving up your independence, your freedom to travel and help others." "There are folks here who need help too," she said, "and I've learned these past weeks that maybe independence isn't everything. Maybe sometimes strength means letting someone else in." He studied her face in the firelight, seeing not just the midwife who'd saved his life, but a woman of courage and conviction. Someone who understood loss as he did, who carried her own scars with quiet dignity. "I need time to pray on this," he said finally. "It's not a decision to make in haste." Margot nodded, understanding in her heart that whatever choice they made would change both their lives forever. The pretense of their engagement had become something real, a possibility of true partnership, of healing, of standing together against those who would take what wasn't theirs to claim. As night settled over the cabin, they sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought as the fire burned low. The deed lay between them on the table, Anna's name a reminder of love lost, and perhaps, God willing, love found again. The days crept by like morning mist over the creek. Levi and Margot moved through their routines, each carrying the weight of decision in their hearts. When word came that Sarah Jensen was struggling with a difficult birth 10 miles north, Margot gathered her midwife's bag without hesitation. "I'll be back soon as I can," she told Levi, mounting her mare. The November wind whipped at her shawl as she rode out. For 2 days and nights, Margot stayed with the Jensens, guiding Sarah through a long labor. When finally the baby girl arrived, crying strong and healthy, Margot's heart swelled with familiar joy. She watched Sarah cradle her daughter, remembering her own lost dreams of motherhood. The ride home was cold but peaceful. As Margot approached the cabin, she noticed fresh wood shavings near the door. Inside, a surprise waited, a beautiful cedar chest, small enough to fit beneath her cot but expertly crafted. The wood gleamed. With oil and delicate carvings of mountain flowers decorated the lid. Levi stood nearby, watching her reaction. "Made it while you were gone," he said softly. "Thought you might need something of your own here, if you decide to stay." Margot ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched by the gesture's meaning. This wasn't just a gift. It was an offering of permanence, of home. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Levi spoke carefully. "Been thinking on what you said about marriage, about protecting the land." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But it's more than that now. These weeks together, they've shown me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Margot asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hope," he answered simply. "Would you consider a real marriage before winter sets in proper? Nothing fancy, just us, God, and the preacher as witness." Margot's heart thundered in her chest. Her vow of purity had been her shield, her way of serving God after the war's horrors. But perhaps God had other plans for her healing. "I need to pray on it," she said. "Just tonight." Levi nodded, understanding in his eyes. That night, Margot knelt beside her cot, wrestling with her soul. The silver moonlight filtered through the cabin window as she poured out her fears to God. When dawn came, peace settled over her like fresh snow. She found Levi by the creek. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." The preacher arrived 3 days later, his horse's hooves breaking through fresh snow. Inside the cabin, lamplight cast a warm glow as they gathered for the ceremony. Margot wore her cleanest dress, a sprig of dried lavender pinned to her collar. Levi had trimmed his beard and donned his black Amish coat. The ceremony was simple, but profound. The preacher's words filled the small space with dignity and grace. When it came time for the ring, Levi withdrew a simple gold band from his pocket. Anna's ring, carefully preserved all these years. "She would have wanted it this way," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Margot's hands trembled as Levi slipped the ring onto her finger. The metal felt warm, as if carrying the blessing of the woman who'd worn it before. Their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle, hesitant, so different from that desperate moment by the creek when she'd saved his life. This time there was no fear, no shame, only the sacred touch of two souls choosing to join their paths. The preacher stayed only long enough to sign the marriage certificate before heading back through the thickening snow. Margot and Levi stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared into the white landscape. That night, Levi sat alone by the hearth, the fire's glow illuminating his face. His lips moved in silent prayer, giving thanks for this unexpected blessing, a second chance at love, at family, at healing. Behind the curtain that still divided their sleeping spaces, Margot lay awake. She touched Anna's ring, its weight, both strange and comforting on her finger. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "if this breaks my vow of purity, I pray for your forgiveness. But if this is your way of showing me a different kind of service, a different kind of healing, then I thank you for your mercy." The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in silence. Inside the cabin, two people who had known deep loss began their journey toward something new, a covenant built not on desperate necessity, but on choice, trust, and the quiet stirrings of love. Winter settled into a gentle rhythm in the mountain cabin. Each morning, Margot woke to find the fire already stoked, Levi's quiet way of caring without words. The wool blanket that had once served as their dividing curtain now lay folded in her cedar chest, a reminder of how far they'd come. One crisp morning, Sarah Jensen visited with an armload of raw wool. "Thought you might want to learn," she offered, setting up her traveling spinning wheel by the hearth. Margot watched, fascinated, as Sarah's fingers transformed the fluffy clouds into steady thread. "The trick is to let it flow natural-like," Sarah explained, guiding Margot's hands. "Don't force it." Hours passed as Margot practiced, her initial lumpy attempts gradually evening out. She found peace in the wheel's steady hum, like a prayer set to motion. Levi, working at his carving bench nearby, would glance up occasionally, a soft smile touching his eyes. His own hands stayed busy with wood and knife, crafting delicate toys for the settlement's children. Tiny horses emerged from cedar blocks, their manes flowing in invisible wind. Little wagons with turning wheels brought joy to wide-eyed young ones who visited with their mothers. "You've got the gift," Margot told him one evening, watching him smooth a rocking horse to silk. He ducked his head, humble as always, but pleasure warmed his face. Their love grew like winter wheat beneath the snow, unseen but steady, taking root in daily kindnesses. When February brought bitter winds, Margot caught a fever that left her shaking. Levi tended her with unwavering devotion, brewing willow bark tea and reading psalms in his deep, gentle voice. "You don't have to stay," she whispered one night, her voice hoarse. "I want to," he answered simply, laying a cool cloth on her forehead. His care helped her heal faster than any medicine could have. As March approached, they rode into San Miguel for supplies, their horses' hooves breaking through crusty snow. The town had changed since autumn, or perhaps it was the townsfolk's eyes that had changed. Where once there had been whispers and turned backs, now came warm greetings. Mrs. Peterson at the general store offered Margot credit without hesitation. "Your husband's toys have brought such joy to my grandchildren," she said, wrapping up coffee and sugar. Outside the store, Reverend Matthews approached them, his manner formal but kind. "The Lord's blessing on your union is clear," he declared, loud enough for others to hear. "You've shown this community what grace can build from hardship." Margot felt tears prick her eyes, remembering the shame that had driven her from this very street months ago. Levi's hand found hers, warm and steady. The sun was setting as they started home, painting the snow-covered hills in rose and gold. About 3 miles out, they spotted smoke rising from a snowbank, not a chimney's steady stream, but the desperate flames of travelers in trouble. They found Clara Mayfield and her young son Timothy huddled by a failing fire, their wagon wheel broken beyond repair. The boy's face was pale with cold, his mother's eyes dark with worry. "The axle snapped 2 hours ago," Clara explained, her voice trembling. "We were heading to my sister's place in Durango." "You'll come home with us," Margot said firmly, already wrapping her spare shawl around Timothy's shoulders. "At least until morning." Levi helped Clara gather their essential belongings, while Margot settled Timothy on her horse. The boy's small hands were like ice against her waist as they rode. Their cabin welcomed the strangers with warmth and light. Margot set about heating soup while Levi stoked the fire higher. Timothy watched with wide eyes as Levi brought out a wooden Noah's Ark he'd been saving for the next church social. "All the animals go in 2 by 2, Levi explained gently, showing the boy how the tiny pairs fit through the ark's door. Timothy's delight filled the cabin like sunshine. After supper they gathered around the hearth. Levi opened his worn Bible, his voice steady as he read from Isaiah. "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles." Margot hummed an old hymn as she rocked Timothy to sleep, his small body heavy against her shoulder. Clara watched with grateful tears in her eyes, her own exhaustion finally showing. The cabin felt different that night, fuller, warmer, more alive. As Margot prepared pallets near the fire for their guests, she caught Levi's gaze. His eyes held the same wondering joy she felt. Their home was becoming a sanctuary, not just for themselves, but for others in need. Hope had indeed returned to the mountain cabin, arriving like spring, not in grand gestures, but in small moments of grace. In shared meals and simple kindnesses, in a child's laughter and a stranger's gratitude, they found the blessing they'd never thought to seek. Dawn brought more than just sunlight to the mountain cabin. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled Levi from his morning prayers, and he stepped onto the porch to see Gideon Wells riding up with a stern-faced man wearing a silver marshal's badge. The railroad surveyor's polished boots gleamed as he dismounted, a leather document case tucked under his arm. "Mr. Stoltzfus," Gideon called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "I trust you've reconsidered our offer?" Inside, Margot paused in helping Clara pack her belongings for the journey ahead. Something in Wells's tone made her blood run cold. She moved to the doorway, standing just behind Levi's shoulder. The marshal spoke next, his words clipped and official. "United States Marshal Ezra Pike, I have some matters to discuss with you both." Gideon withdrew papers from his case, the fresh ink barely dry. "We've uncovered records from Pennsylvania, Mr. Stoltzfus. Your late wife, Anna, was officially recorded as deceased 3 years ago. Under territorial law, that nullifies any claim through her name." Levi's face went pale. "That's not possible. I never filed." "The documents are quite clear," Wells interrupted, passing them to Marshal Pike. "You have 30 days to vacate this property." Clara emerged from the cabin, holding Timothy's hand. The boy clutched the wooden Noah's Ark Levi had given him the night before. "That's not all," Marshal Pike added, pulling another paper from his vest. "I have a warrant here for Margot Bell Stoltzfus." The morning air seemed to freeze. Margot stepped forward, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "On what charge?" "Practicing medicine without proper license or credentials. We have reports of a death during childbirth in Durango last summer." The marshal's eyes were cold as mountain stone. "A Mrs. Rebecca Thompson." "No!" Margot's cry was sharp with pain. "I did everything I could to save her. The baby was turned wrong, there was too much blood. I was there." Clara spoke up suddenly, moving toward them. "I assisted Margot that night. Rebecca was dying before we ever reached her. Margot worked for hours trying to save both mother and child." The marshal's expression didn't change. "The law is clear, ma'am. Only licensed doctors can attend difficult births. Mrs. Stoltzfus will need to answer these charges before a judge. Levi moved to stand between Margot and the marshal, his broad shoulders tense. She's helped dozens of mothers safely deliver. You can't. Step aside, sir. Pike's hand rested on his holster. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she hugged Margot. I'll speak for you. We all will. Every mother you've helped. The marshal's wagon waited on the road below. Margot gathered her Bible and shawl with shaking hands, then turned to Levi. His eyes held such helpless anguish that she had to look away. I'll follow, he whispered, touching her hand briefly. We'll sort this out. The ride to San Miguel stretched like an endless nightmare. Margot sat rigid in the wagon, clutching her Bible while Marshal Pike drove. She could hear Levi's horse walking steadily behind them, his presence both comfort and fresh pain. The town jail was a small building of rough stone. Inside, iron bars divided the space into 2 cells. Marshal Pike led Margot to the smaller one, the key's turn in the lock echoing with terrible finality. The circuit judge arrives next week, he informed her, hanging, the key on a hook by his desk. You'll have your hearing then. Through the window, Margot watched the sun sink behind the mountains. The same peaks she'd viewed from their cabin seemed foreign now, distant as another life. She could hear Levi's quiet footsteps as he paced outside the jail, refusing to leave. In the growing darkness, Margot sank to her knees on the thin pallet. Her Bible fell open to psalms of lament, pages worn smooth by years of seeking comfort. The words blurred through her tears as she whispered into the night. Lord, if this is your will. Her voice broke on the prayer. Teach me mercy. The cell was cold, but colder still was the fear that all she and Levi had built might crumble like sand. Their home, their marriage, the life they'd made from broken pieces, all threatened now by law and lies. Yet even in that dark hour, something in her refused to break. The same faith that had led her to save Levi's life, that had guided her hands through countless births, still whispered of hope. Outside, an owl called into the night. Inside, Margot wrapped her shawl tighter and waited for dawn, her prayers rising like smoke in the mountain air. In the growing darkness of the jail cell, Margot heard labored breathing from the adjoining space. She moved closer to the iron bars dividing them, squinting to make out a small form huddled in the corner. A young Apache girl, no more than 12 summers old, lay curled on a thin blanket, her face flushed with fever. "Hello, little one," Margot called softly. The girl's eyes fluttered open, glazed with sickness. Marshal Pike's heavy boots crossed the wooden floor. "Found her with a stolen horse," he explained gruffly. "Father claims he bought it fair, but the brand says different." "She needs care," Margot said, pressing her face to the bars. "That fever's dangerous." "Doctor's away until tomorrow." The marshal shrugged, settling at his desk with a cup of coffee. Margot untied her cotton kerchief and reached through the bars toward the water bucket, just within grasp. The fabric soaked up the cool liquid as she squeezed it carefully. "Come closer, child," she coaxed. The girl dragged herself toward Margot's outstretched hand. When the damp cloth touched her burning forehead, she sighed with relief. Margot began humming softly, the familiar notes of Rock of Ages filling the dim space. Outside the barred window, Levi knelt in the dusty street, his head bowed in prayer. The hymn drifted out to him, and his voice joined hers in a whispered harmony. "Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee." The girl's breathing eased as Margot continued bathing her face and neck. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Elena." the child whispered in careful English. "My father did not steal. The horse was traded fair." "I believe you," Margot soothed, re-wetting the kerchief. The hymn never stopped, becoming a quiet current beneath their words. The jail door creaked open as Reverend Thomas entered, his Bible tucked under one arm. He approached Margot's cell, watching her tend to Elena. "The Lord tests the righteous," he said softly, "but he does not abandon them." Margot looked up, her hand still gentle on Elena's brow. "I keep thinking of Job, how he never lost faith despite his trials." "Your situation grieves us all," the preacher said, "but God's purpose works even through injustice. Hold fast to your faith, Sister Margot." She nodded, grateful for his presence. "Will you pray with us?" The Reverend bowed his head, his words mixing with the continuing hymn as Elena finally drifted into fevered sleep. Across town in the telegraph office, Gideon Wells sat with Marshall Pike, sharing a bottle of whiskey as darkness gathered outside. Papers were spread across the rough wooden desk between them. "The railroad needs that land," Wells said, pouring another measure. "The grade's perfect for a depot. Water access, clear sight lines. Can't find better between here and Durango." Pike studied the survey maps. "Stoltzfus won't leave Willing. Man's got roots there now. That's why the timing's perfect." Wells tapped the arrest warrant with one manicured finger. "His wife in jail. Winter coming on. He'll have to sell. The price we offered was fair." "Fair's got nothing to do with it anymore," Pike observed, but he didn't refuse the whiskey. "What about the midwife charges?" Wells shrugged. "Does it matter? By the time the judge sorts it out, spring will come. Progress doesn't wait for sentiment, Marshal." Outside the jail, Levi sat at a rough table under the stars, writing by lantern light. His petition to the territorial judge filled page after page, detailing Margot's years of service, the lives she'd saved, the families who could speak for her character. But the words felt hollow, without the means to deliver them. The territorial court sat in Santa Fe, a journey of many days. With winter approaching and no money for travel, the papers seemed as useless as leaves in the wind. He could hear Margot still humming inside, her voice carrying strength even through iron bars. The Apache girl's fever had broken slightly under her care. Even imprisoned, his wife found ways to serve others, to show mercy. "Lord," he prayed, letting the pen fall from his tired fingers, "show us your path through this valley." The night deepened around him, stars wheeling overhead. Inside the jail, Margot continued her vigil, cooling Elena's face, humming the ancient hymn of refuge. Her own fears faded before the child's need, just as they had when she'd first knelt to save Levi by the creek. She remembered her vow of purity, made in that Pennsylvania hospital so long ago. Perhaps this was its true meaning, not withdrawal from the world's pain, but immersion in its healing. Not safety, but service. Elena stirred, murmuring in her native tongue. Margot smoothed the damp hair from her forehead, her song never ceasing in the darkness. Outside, Levi's prayers rose to join it, twin melodies of faith ascending like incense into the vast night sky. Dawn painted the mountains in shades of amber and rose as Levi saddled his horse. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air while he checked the cinch straps one final time. 70 miles stretched between him and Silverton, a journey made treacherous by half-frozen roads and the threat of early snow. "Lord, guide my path," he prayed aloud, swinging into the saddle. His mare's hooves crunched through frozen puddles as they set out, following the winding trail north. "Keep Margot safe until I return." The sun climbed higher, but brought little warmth. Ice rimmed the creek beds they crossed, and patches of frozen ground made the horse pick her steps carefully. Levi's prayers continued steadily, matching the rhythm of hoofbeats against the hard earth. Back in the San Miguel jail, Margot shared her morning bread with Elena, whose fever still burned hot. The girl managed a few small bites, then lay back on the thin blanket while Margot hummed another hymn. "My father will come," Elena whispered between verses. "He speaks truth about the horse." Margot dampened her kerchief again, placing it gently on the girl's forehead. "Rest now. The Lord watches over us both." The morning lengthened into afternoon. Reverend Thomas arrived, his expression grave as he approached Margot's cell. "I've news," he said quietly. "Your husband's petition reached Judge Morrison in Silverton, but Marshal Pike plans to move you to Durango Prison before the hearing." Margot's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "When?" "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." The preacher gripped the iron bars. "I'll keep praying, Sister Margot. The Lord hasn't forsaken you." As evening approached, heavy clouds gathered over the mountains. The first snowflakes began drifting past the jail windows, just as Elena's fever finally broke. The girl's eyes cleared, and her skin cooled beneath Margot's touch. "Thank you," Elena murmured, sitting up slowly. The songs helped chase the sickness away. Before Margot could respond, angry voices erupted outside. The jail door burst open, bringing a blast of cold air and a tall Apache man whose dark eyes blazed with fury. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded in accented English. "What have you done with her?" "Father!" Elena called out, pressing against the bars that separated their cells. The man rushed to her, reaching through the iron to touch her face. His anger faltered as he felt her cool skin. "Your fever, it's gone." "The kind lady helped me," Elena explained, gesturing to Margot. "She gave me water and bread and sang healing songs all day and night." The father turned to study Margot, his expression softening as Elena described how she had been tended. Marshal Pike stood in the doorway, watching the exchange with wary eyes. "You cared for my child when others would not?" the Apache father asked Margot. "She needed help," Margot answered simply. "God's mercy knows no boundaries." The man straightened, drawing himself up proudly. "I am Thomas Sleeping Bear," he announced. "I trade horses in these mountains. The one they claim was stolen was bought fair from Mexican traders." He pulled papers from his coat. Bill of sale receipts written in Spanish. Marshal Pike examined the documents, then nodded slowly. "Appears to be in order. My apologies for the misunderstanding." He unlocked Elena's cell, and father and daughter embraced. Before leaving, Thomas Sleeping Bear turned back to Margot. "You showed kindness to my child when you had reason for bitterness. I will not forget this debt." Margot smiled gently. "If you wish to repay me, pray for my husband. He rides to Silverton in this weather, seeking justice." "I will do more than pray," Thomas promised, his voice carrying the weight of oath. "Your mercy shall be returned." He wrapped his daughter in his heavy blanket and led her out into the swirling snow. Through the barred window, Margot watched them mount their horses and ride away. The snow was falling harder now, and somewhere on the frozen trail to Silverton, Levi faced the same storm. She pressed her forehead against the cold iron and began to sing again, her clear voice rising above the wind. "Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee." The hymn echoed through the empty jail, a prayer carried on melody, while outside the snow continued to fall, blanketing the land in white silence. Snow fell steadily from a steel-gray sky as Thomas Sleeping Bear guided his paint horse through the mountain passes. 2 days of tracking had led him to Marshal Pike's camp, nestled in a grove of bare aspens. His keen eyes noted the fancy leather satchel propped against a log. Gideon Wells's prized possession, always within arm's reach. The railroad man sat warming his hands by the fire, startling when the Apache scout emerged from the swirling snow. Marshal Pike's hand moved toward his holster, but Thomas raised his empty palms in peace. "I bring truth," Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the clearing. From his coat, he withdrew a bundle of papers, documents gathered from trading posts and settlements across 3 territories. Gideon Wells rose quickly, reaching for his satchel, but Thomas was faster. "These papers show your lies," he said, spreading the evidence before Marshal Pike. "Here, deed signatures that don't match, dates changed, money paid to men who guard your secrets." The marshal's weathered face darkened as he examined the documents. Railroad receipts revealed bribes paid to county clerks. Land office records showed dates altered with careful forgery. Most damning was a letter in Wells's own hand, detailing plans to seize homestead claims through false documentation. "This can't be legal evidence," Wells protested, his polished manner cracking. "The word of an Indian scout—" "The documents speak for themselves," Marshal Pike cut in, his voice hard as iron. "These are territorial crimes, Wells. Federal crimes." Through the falling snow, hoofbeats approached. Levi Stoltzfus rode into the clearing, his clothes covered in frost from his long journey back from Silverton. His eyes met Thomas's with quiet recognition. "The judge must see these," Levi said softly, dismounting with stiff movements. "Every hour Margot stays in that cell is an hour too long." Thomas gathered the papers carefully, protecting them from the snow. "I will ride with you, brother. Truth must have many voices." Together they mounted up, leaving Marshal Pike to deal with the sputtering railroad man. The snow thickened as they rode toward San Miguel, but neither man spoke of stopping. God's justice drove them forward through the storm. They found Reverend Thomas in his study, reading by lamplight. His eyes widened at the sight of the unlikely pair, the Amish farmer and the Apache scout, standing snow-covered in his doorway. "The railroad sins," Thomas said simply, laying out the evidence. "Written in their own hand." The preacher's hands trembled as he examined page after page. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "I'll take these to Judge Morrison myself. He's still in town from the territory circuit." While the preacher rushed through the snowy streets, Levi made his way to the jail. The windows glowed with faint lamplight, and through the bars he could hear Margot's voice raised in evening prayer. "I'll wait here," he said, settling onto the cold ground beneath the window. "Until dawn, if need be." Inside her cell, Margot knelt beside her thin pallet. The iron chains at her wrists clinked softly as she folded her hands. "Lord," she prayed, "grant me strength to forgive as you forgive. Let my heart hold no bitterness." Peace settled over her like a warm blanket, despite the chill seeping through the stone walls. She thought of Elena, restored to health and family. She thought of Levi, riding through snow and darkness to seek justice. Even in chains, she felt God's presence closer than her own breath. Hours passed. Snow continued falling, coating Levi's shoulders and hat as he maintained his vigil. He hummed hymns softly, harmonizing with Margot's prayers drifting through the barred window. Though separated by iron and stone, their faith joined them in the long winter night. The marshal's heavy boots crunched through fresh snow near midnight. He paused, looking down at Levi's huddled form. "Your wife's a good woman," he said gruffly. "Showed more Christian charity in that cell than most folks do in church." Levi nodded without speaking. Inside, Margot's clear voice lifted in another verse of Amazing Grace. The lawman shifted uncomfortably. Judge Morrison's reviewing the evidence now. Never thought I'd say it, but seems we owe a debt to your Apache friend. He exposed corruption that might have ruined dozens of honest homesteaders. God's truth finds its way, Levi replied simply, through unexpected paths and people. Snow gathered in, drifts against the jail walls as the night deepened. Levi remained motionless beneath the window, prayer beads moving silently through his fingers. Above him, Margot's soft singing continued, carrying hope through the darkness like a lantern's steady flame. Golden sunlight spilled across San Miguel's muddy streets as Judge Morrison strode toward the jail, his black robes flecked with melting snow. His weathered face held the gravity of justice as he clutched a leather portfolio filled with papers. Marshal Pike met him at the door, keys jangling at his belt. Inside the dim cell, Margot knelt in morning prayer. She looked up as footsteps approached, her face calm despite the chains still binding her wrists. "Mrs. Stoltzfus," the judge announced, "all charges against you are dismissed." He held up the documents, letting morning light illuminate the official seal. "Furthermore, your husband's land claim is fully restored under your joint title as his lawful wife." The marshal removed her shackles with obvious reluctance, his fingers working the iron locks. "You're free to go," he muttered. Margot rose slowly, legs stiff from the cold stone floor. She gathered her Bible and shawl, then stepped into the brilliant morning light. There stood Levi, hat clutched in his trembling hands. Tears glistened in his deep brown eyes as he watched her emerge from captivity. "You saved me twice," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "First from the snake's venom, then from losing everything I had left of Anna's memory." Margot laughed through her own tears, reaching for his calloused hands. "No, Levi, you saved me. From loneliness, from fear, from believing I could never be worthy of love again." They mounted their horses, riding side by side through the melting snow toward home. The San Juan Valley spread before them, crystalline and pristine. Spring's first thaw transformed the landscape. Ice crackled on tree branches, revealing tender buds beneath. Water trickled down rocky slopes in silver ribbons, as if the mountains themselves wept with joy. That evening, they sat before the hearth in their cabin, watching flames dance across seasoned cedar logs. Levi reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me what mercy truly means." Margot turned to face him, firelight warming her features. "It wasn't sin that saved you that day by the creek," she said. "It was mercy, God's mercy, working through human hands." Their kiss, tender and pure, sealed their redemption in the soft firelight. Like spring returning to the valley, grace had transformed their broken paths into a single road forward, one paved with forgiveness, understanding, and love's patient strength. Spring winds carried the scent of wild lupine and desert paintbrush across the San Juan Valley. 6 weeks had passed since that morning of redemption, and nature herself seemed to celebrate their victory. Margot and Levi worked side by side, their hammers ringing in harmony as they rebuilt the cabin's weather-worn porch. "Hand me that 4-inch nail, would you?" Levi asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Margot passed it to him, her fingers brushing his. The touch, once forbidden, now felt as natural as breathing. Together they hung the fresh-carved wooden sign, "Mercy Creek Homestead, Help and Healing for All." The letters, carved deep by Levi's skilled hands, caught the afternoon light. Below them, wild roses climbed the new trellis, their pink blooms nodding in the breeze. Women from across the valley began arriving daily, seeking Margot's gentle wisdom. Some came for birthing help, others for healing teas and poultices. Each found more than medicine. They found understanding in Margot's quiet strength and Levi's steadfast presence. One clear morning, familiar hoofbeats approached. Little Sparrow, the Apache girl who had shared Margot's jail cell, rode up on her father's horse. Her dark eyes sparkled with health as she dismounted, carrying a woven basket filled with dried herbs and berries. "For the woman who sang to me," she said softly in English, presenting the gift. Her father, standing bare, nodded solemnly. "Our people remember those who show kindness." Margot accepted the basket with tears in her eyes, remembering those dark hours transformed by simple mercy. Levi stood beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder. That Sunday, Preacher Morrison rode out to dedicate their renewed home. The small crowd gathered in the yard included faces once suspicious, now softened by understanding. The preacher's prayer rose like incense in the morning air. "Lord, bless this place of mercy, where your love flows like water in the desert." As evening painted the sky in coral and gold, Levi and Margot sat together on their new porch swing. Their joined hands rested easily between them, wedding rings catching the last light. Above them, barn swallows darted and swooped, returning to the mud nests they'd built beneath the fresh-hewn eaves. Margot watched the birds' graceful dance, remembering her own wandering days. Who would have thought, she mused, that a snake bite could lead to such blessing? Levi squeezed her hand. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly, his voice holding the wonder of it all. The once-broken Amish man and the wandering virgin nurse had found not just love, but divine purpose in their shared path. Inside their cabin, the lamp cast its gentle glow through the window, turning the glass to honey. As twilight deepened to dusk, Margot's clear voice lifted in the hymn that had sustained her through darkness. "Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee." The familiar words floated across Mercy Creek, carrying the promise of grace to all who might hear. Here, where venom had once threatened death, new life flourished. Here, where loneliness had once ruled, love made its lasting home. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.